Welcome to UCLA Extension's Department of Business, Management, and Legal Programs video lecture series on entrepreneurship, new venture formation, and strategic business plan development. The video you're about to watch gives instructions on how to develop an industry analysis, basically an overview of how an industry works. I'm Harry Redinger, your instructor. There is a total of over 40 videos in this lecture series that integrates with our UCLA Extension online course management program, Canvas. Each video strives to be brief and will have a little overlap with the other videos, with other videos to tie our curriculum together. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to go into the subject matter of how to develop an industry analysis. In essence, the industry analysis wants to explain how the industry works on a national level or international level. The essence of how the product or service is provided. This particular subject matter has the potential of just being an enormous task, especially if we are new to the industry, if we're developing a business plan for something we don't have real life work experience in. The process of researching all the aspects of an industry can be endless because of one of the benefits of the internet is we can do Google searches and find a lifetime worth of information to read and study about a particular industry. So, you know, the whole process of developing an industry analysis, we have to have a certain mindset, is our objective is to educate the reader on how the industry works. But in real life, what often happens is you, the individual developing the business concept, the model, might be learning how the industry works for the first time yourself. And so therefore, you know, there's two objectives, right? We're mastering how the industry we're getting into works, but we're also mastering it well enough to explain to somebody else how it works. Which brings us to the subject matter of our first slide. And our first slide, you know, what's the best way to approach the subject matter? Now, for those of you who have a background in chemistry, you probably know what a titration is. And I'm presenting to you an analogy right now. A titration in a laboratory is a way of measuring the content of a substance within a liquid, such as alcohol, for instance. So we could take a substance or a beaker here that's got alcohol in it, and if we want to find out the percent of alcohol, we can drop a particular chemical in it and count the number of eyedropper drops that go into it. And once it reaches a point of what we refer to as supersaturation, we're able then to look up the number of drops per the number of milliliters of liquid in the beaker and correlate that with a table and tell you what percent strength of alcohol, percent of alcohol is in that particular substance. Now, the reason why I share this image with you as you stand at the threshold of developing an industry analysis is that because there's so much information there, our objective is to master this information to the point where we've got supersaturation. We got it. We know enough to start writing. In a way, if I took my head and opened up my head and I had a beaker of water and I started pouring water, and the water symbolizes knowledge, and I start pouring knowledge into my head, as the knowledge fills up my legs and my torso, eventually it's going to spill over into my arms and flow down my arms and hit my fingertips. And symbolically, that's when I'm ready to start typing the keyboard. So we want to study the subject matter relevant to explain how the industry works, how big the industry is, the cycles the industry goes through, and where the industry is going into the future. And once we've achieved that, now we're ready to start writing. And it's just something, and we don't want to copy and paste, because that always produces a really messy and large, that doesn't represent you mastering the subject matter. You want to know the subject matter well enough that you can have a dialogue with it. It just comes out of you. You know it well enough to write it yourself, to author this document yourself. Is a good mindset to have as you stand on the threshold of developing your company history. Also bear in mind, one of the benefits of going through this curriculum, because I would wager to say that most people who start off to develop a business model or develop a business or business plan never complete the process, because it's so huge. And one of the benefits of going through this program is that we're teaching you just the essential types and topics of information to research, to assemble a complete, such as we're about to introduce to you the 4 parts of an industry analysis. By the way, that is a final exam question. What are the 4 parts of an industry analysis? So look for those answers as we go through. I forgot to make a slide for that, but that is one of our final exam questions. What are the 4 parts of an industry analysis, and explain the objective of each of the 4 parts. Anyway, to get past this slide, that our objective is to master how to develop these 4 parts, and by doing that, you're going to save a huge amount of time and get through this potentially really painful part of business plan development and or acquiring the essential knowledge to be a competent entrepreneur. Next slide. So I want to touch base a little bit on the book, Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. So per previous videos, you can tell this is one of my favorite books. And what makes this book so special with this curriculum, as well as how to do a market analysis, which is the point of entry into an industry, is that the tipping point teaches us to look for how little changes can create a pandemic of demand for what we're about to do. So as we study how an industry works, we want to take what we're learning and being very cognizant of what's going on now, because maybe because every day, every week, every month, things change. New laws get passed, new tax laws, things create new opportunities. And having an eye, being aware in the back of your mind, looking for what competitors or change in the industry, they might create an opening, a new way to twist something within an industry, and thus creating new demands for products and services within the industry. So I really believe for an entrepreneur, anyone going into any aspect, of a business management leadership, that this is an essential book to have, or knowledge to have, to see where these opportunities might be popping up and exist within an industry. Okay, so our goal here is to master how to develop an industry analysis section of a business plan, whereas I've already mentioned its objective is to explain how the industry works on a national or international basis. Because let's say, the manufacturing of products and services or beverages and foods, things like that, regardless of the country, regardless of the state, there's usually a logical sequence that has to take place, and that's the first thing that we want to educate the reader of our business plan, or educate someone who's being introduced to the concept of our business, how that process takes place. I found this slide. I just want to share it with you. It's just a definition of an industry analysis. So an industry analysis is a market assessment tool designed to provide a business with an idea of the complexity of a particular industry. So some industries are really perhaps simple, but never underestimate someone's inability to understand how an industry works, by the way, to an industry that's just incredibly complex with bureaucracy and laws and rules and regulations, and you kind of wonder how anybody can survive in it. So but basically, the industry analysis wants to make sense in the most simplistic possible way with graphs, diagrams, introductions, explanations on how an industry works. Okay, so we are going to talk about now, for the balance of our little presentation here on how to develop an industry analysis, the 4 parts of an industry analysis, and I believe I'm going to be introducing you 5 steps to creating these 4 articles. Now, if you think about, since we're using the development of a business plan as a model or structure for reviewing basic theories and concepts of entrepreneurship, new venture formation, that whether you're developing a business plan or developing a business, that we still go through the same subject matters that are presented in a business plan. And so let's think of these 4 parts of an industry analysis as articles within a chapter called industry analysis. So let's go over these 4 articles. The first is the industry introduction, where we're just going to explain how the industry works in the most simplistic way. And I'm going to share with you some really, really fabulous tools and graphics for doing that just really can be applied to any industry. Next is an industry economic profile. So we want to explain to the reader and present how large is the industry, how big is the industry, how many millions and billions of dollars go down in newly produced goods and services within the industry. The next article in this chapter, called Industry Analysis, we want to talk about the historical cycles of the industry. What cycles does this industry go through January through December? And the reason why this is important, at some point in the process of forming a business or writing a business plan, that we're going to have to do a cash flow projection. We're going to have to understand the peaks and valleys of how cash flows in an industry. So, if you're, and I think as I presented in other videos, if you're selling Christmas trees, they'll sell in December, but if you're selling bicycles, they'll sell in the summer, not in December. So, so if it's a bicycle industry, we expect the peak to be June, July, August, September, etc., and then start to die down. Whereas Christmas trees, some come November, we should towards the end of November, a Christmas tree starting to pick up, early December, skyrocketing, and then nosediving immediately after Christmas. So, we can start to, get a feel for what are the cycles that the industry goes through, and we're going to need to take those cycles and interpret them into market demand for the profit centers that you're going to develop later on. So when we do a cash flow projection, we're going to list our profit centers and units per profit center times the price per unit, and how that's going to peak and fall, and how it's going to go through a cash flow process. And it all starts with understanding the industry historical cycles. Next is our industry economic forecast, and that's where the industry is going in terms of technology and laws and taxes, consumer demand and technology and things like that. We're going to talk a little bit about where and how to get that information. Okay, let's get started with our introduction to the industry. So, step 1, we need and want to find a number that profiles the industry, called our SIC code number, which means our standard industry classification number. And we use the standard industry classification manual to find this number. We can it's very easy to find. Just Google SIC code or standard industrial classification code, and there's numerous websites on the internet that you can go to find this, and you start typing in descriptions of your industry, the title of your industry, and it takes you to sections within these code systems to find the code that represents your industry. This can take a bit of time because there's literally thousands of industry niches out there. So it's a matter of, depending on how far down the digits that you use to describe your industry, there could be, literally hundreds of different angles on your industry that's profiled by one of these codes. The more specific you can get, the more detailed information you'll be able to acquire using national and internationally developed information resources to acquire all the information you're looking for to develop your industry analysis, such as how it works, how big it is, the cycles it goes through, and where's it going in the future. So, but it all starts by finding one of the code first. I encourage you to find the SIC code number, but also for businesses in America, Canada, and Mexico, the North American Industry Classifications number also. They're very similar systems to each other, but they're different. What seems to be a universally used number is the SIC code number. However, the North American Industry Classification number system has more services, more technology type things in it. The SIC code system, as you can tell on the manual here, I think the most recent updated is like 1987. Believe it or not, that's still the code system numbers they use today. Whereas the North American Industry Classification system is a little more updated. But that's where we start. This gives you kind of an example of some of the words and how it's broken down. As you can see, such as industry classification 23 is construction. But the further we go down in terms of the digits, the more defined we can be about acquiring information there. And I think I'm going to talk about, I have a slide coming up in a bit, but also know that trade associations are another fabulous place to get information on an industry. And also know that some of this published information, again, we're going to get to it, is very expensive. But through academic institutions as well as your bank, if you go into your bank, the business lending division of your bank, banks often subscribe to these services, and you can get them free through financial institutions. But anyway, the step one is finding our SIC code number, and there's many resources out there to find it. We can't go forward without this number because this is the number we use to find out the total gross domestic product, the amount of dollars in billions, millions, and billions of dollars that your industry produces at a state level, a national level, on an annual basis, which is pretty important to have established in your industry analysis. Step two is we have to explain how the industry works, which can be kind of a complicated process, but I recommend that I've developed in the next slide here is this is kind of a template that you can use to explain any industry. So in essence, and as we start to explain how this diagram functions, that we can see that the boxes across the top actually represent vendors. So we can start to see, fast forward the general ledger chart of accounts in here, or an income statement. So the boxes at the top represent vendors, the people we write checks to. So we would refer to that as direct cost of sales. And the orange boxes in the center would be overhead accounts in terms of staff management. And then the boxes at the bottom represent revenue accounts. But anyway, okay. Okay, so first, as I mentioned earlier, these are the top ones. The blue boxes are vendor accounts, and so we want to take a look at all the services and products and materials that we have to purchase to go into, and in this case, it says restaurant industry. Think that, and I think the next slide. Eventually, we have a slide that has a beaker there. But what are all the resources we have to purchase to manufacture, to integrate, to develop our profit centers? Or the output of our industry. Now, bear in mind, I want to make a little note here. We're not to get this mixed up with an organizational structure. Totally different. The organizational structure is division of labor. The industry structure diagram that we're looking here shows more of a flow of goods and services coming in the top, how they're how they are brought together to in a process, a business model process, to develop the profit centers. So it's totally different than an organizational structure. Now we're going to profile management, staff, investors, consultants, the internal resources that come together to produce the goods and services that are of our mission statement. And then finally, and that's why I have a beaker here that, we're going to put all this stuff in, mix it up, and then pour it out, and that creates our profit centers. So in this case, this is the restaurant industry, and we have logo, product sales, catering, home meal replacement, business lunches, etc. We're going to basically put our our profit centers down. So that's an overview of how to develop an industry organizational structure. And it's a fabulous tool because any industry is going to have vendors, any industry is going to have management staff, any industry is going to have profit centers. So this just gives a way to break that out, and from the standpoint of a graphic that you can use for presenting your business plan, most people can understand this. Another graph that's always good to try to present is some kind of diagram that shows how the product or service is actually made. And up here we have a conveyor belt that kind of, that shows, and just being creative here, but phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 in the process of the manufacturing or consulting process. We could also put a floor plan of an office or of a factory that shows what things go on in different parts, and then maybe a flow chart of things going through, or how a customer is led to one department to another department to another department to complete the process. But anything you can do to graphically show how the product and services developed and manufactured or provided is a plus. Our next slide here diagrams how beer is made. So this is a beer brewery that shows what takes place at the top in terms of taking the malt, the barley, the grain, and putting it in a big mushing it all up, and how that goes into a big kettle, and how the whole process and fermentation, and eventually down here as it winds up into glass or bottled or kegged beer. But if you were doing a business plan or developing a beer brewing type business, this would be an excellent diagram to show how that process takes place to manufacture beer. So, therefore, at this point, and now I'm going to back up for a second here to the slide that has the the industry organizational structure. Once this, for those of you who are studying how to write a business plan, once you've outlined this structure, now your goal is to do a narrative description of each box here, or a paragraph that talks about all the vendors, a paragraph that talks about what management and staff does, a paragraph that talks about the profit centers, the goods and services that are presented to the marketplace as an industry from this process. So think of this as a graphic description or graphical structure of the narrative descriptions you're going to develop to explain the industry. So this gets your mind kind of the structure for developing the sentences and paragraphs to introduce how the industry works. Okay, now we're going to go into step 3. Step 3 is profile the economic size of your industry. And we do that by working with organizations such as Standard & Poor's, Dun & Bradstreet's, Hoover's, First Research. I find First Research is an economic information resource that most financial institutions, local banks, and investment type organizations buy annual subscriptions to. If you're a student at UCLA Extension, you have access of all these things through the Anderson Business School Library. So if you go there and show that you're currently enrolled, you have access to that information working with the librarianist. For those of you who are in the greater Los Angeles area, know that the downtown Los Angeles library has a fabulous business library, and it's just beautiful with Art Deco type art. It's just great. So what you do is you give them your license, and then they'll pull any of these resources for you. So if you give them your license and you look up and request specific publications, they have the complete and most current publications for all the industries profiled by Standard & Poor's, Dun & Bradstreet, and First Research. So if you go in there and they have catalogs, you look it up and say, please, provide me, and sometimes they have a limit of how much stuff they pull you at once. These research manuals or monograms, then you can make it, and then they have a copy machine. You can make copies and work there, but you can access most of the stuff through the downtown Los Angeles library business section. And all academic institutions that have schools of businesses will also have them there. Another thing, too, is you can contact these organizations directly and explain that you are in an academic program, and they usually will forward you PDF of these documents for free. If you're a business organization, as I understand it, the most current fees is almost something like $2,000 a year license to get access. So it's expensive information to acquire as a business, but if you're a student, they usually will work with you in getting this information to you. So the next, we need to pin down, come up with, a profile of how many millions and billions of dollars it goes down in your industry. Sometimes when you present this in a business plan, it's good to juxtapose the dollar volume of your industry with, the medical industry or cell phone ringtones. Believe it or not, is a multi-million-dollar industry. It's amazing how some very small market niches can have just billions of dollars of revenue go down because it's a national level. It's just mind-boggling how much money goes down for the silliest, simple little things sometimes. That's why, never underestimate the financial opportunity that can be found in some very obscure industries sometimes. So next, we want to take a look at how to research and document the historical cycles of the industry. And I sometimes find that, what I've often done in the past is I'll go into a library, and by the way, this is where experience comes in. I mean, if you're in the industry, you just know. But you do have to explain in your business plan the demand and volume that an industry has on a quarterly, monthly basis throughout the year, or at least know. Because if you don't talk about it, you do have to show it in your cash flow. You should see these numbers grow up and down in terms of annual revenue. Now, there are some industries like utilities and things like that that have very consistent revenues per month, per quarter. But, even still, if it's water, like for instance, a water utility is going to have, a higher demand in the summer than in the winter. A electrical utility company is going to have a higher demand for electricity in the summer than, shall we say, in the winter. Gas and heating oil will have more demand in the winter than in the summer. So there's just, dumb logic to some of this stuff, but we still have to take a look at it. So I've got this funny little diagram here showing kind of a graph that perhaps we want to have in your business plan. But in terms of being able to project or have enough information to project annual cash flow, here we have a bunch of Santa Clauses in line at a job center, and I believe the person says, sorry, but we only have vacancies for Easter bunnies. So clearly these gentlemen are dressed in the wrong kind of costume to get a job during Easter. But if we can see by the graph on the side, you can see a profile of the spending of an industry going up and down. And we probably want to have something like that in our business plan to show that we are street smart. We know the cash flow cycles of our industry. And again, Standard & Poor's, Dun & Bradstreet, and these financial research type organizations will have this information too. Also know that trade magazines, and I'll talk about this later in forecasting, but they will also tend to have this kind of information available directly for sale or for free. And sometimes they do, with economic forecasts, they'll project this with their December, January, or June, July issues of their publications. Now we're going to get into step 5, and that's doing our economic forecast of the industry. And again, experience is everything here. And being able to project where industry is going in terms of taxes, technology, consumer demand, substitute products and services and things of this sort. But if there's any clear trends that are going on in the past and where it's going, we want to talk about it. We want to get this out in the open. We want to be aware of it. And so when we're doing an economic forecast, as I've mentioned also many places in our video series here, we want to understand where the industry's been to understand where it's going. So just like a company history or a biography, we might want to talk about the history of the industry a little bit here and see if we can't show any trend analysis in terms of where it's going. Also know, after you start the business, after you develop the business plan, that an essential aspect of being an entrepreneur is always being aware of what the industry is doing. So this is why it's good to join trade associations, to subscribe to industry trade association magazines that talk about the trends that are going on in the industry. Also, that if you don't do it, I encourage you to delegate somebody within your organization to stay aware of this information by subscribing and having this person read the publication on a weekly, monthly basis whenever it comes out, or quarterly. And then when you do have administrative meetings, and part of your meeting agenda is that this person might give updates or profiles or abstract presentations of what's new in whatever the trade journal has to say. That way everyone's aware of trends and directions going on in the industry. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we look to Standard & Poor's, Dun & Bradstreet, and I probably should have a logo up there that just says trade associations for where we can find this kind of information. As I get close to wrapping up here on the subject matter of how to develop an industry analysis, I want you to be aware of some opportunities that you might stumble upon in the process of developing an industry analysis for your business. first off, that it's not unusual that you might discover that there's very little to no information about your industry because it's just new. No one's really integrated the services and resources to form an industry as to what you're doing. It's totally possible. And so if you do come across that and you do develop an industry analysis, I just want you to be aware that might be something you can sell as a product, a profit center. So others that might be wanting to get into the industry might stumble across it, and you might have an abstract of it and somehow find a way to post that on Craigslist or, well, I don't know if Facebook is, but find some kind of way to, to sell that through the internet. Also, be aware that that there might not be any form of a trade association associated with the industry that you're getting into. And so one of the things you can do to differentiate your business in the industry is actually form a trade association, or maybe there is a trade association, but it's unique to an area on the other side of the United States. And so you develop a trade association for the practitioners of your industry in your region. And even though you're going to be bringing competitors together, being someone who creates communities gets a reputation of someone who's passionate about the industry, and it might be one of those little things that really differentiates you above your competition as someone who's actually formed a trade association for your industry in your marketplace. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Next is to form a local industry business or owners club association. The same thing as a trade association, but just a little more clubby. A little less emphasis on publications and producing seminars and resources to the industry. It's just a club. We all get together and have a beer or a cup of coffee or however it works of other people in the industry. So let's say, I don't know, you're a residential sheet metal contractor, and maybe there's a total of 50 residential sheet metal contractors in your marketplace, and there's no organization amongst them. Well, maybe you bring this together, and who knows, maybe they all show up, and at best, it's a way to make new friends. It just, people get to know each other. Maybe there's a job that one person doesn't want to do, they're too busy, and refers somebody else. So there's good competitors, there's bad competitors, but just kind of keep in the mind that, one of my favorite words is serendipity. So as people get to meet each other, who knows what could come from it. Next is you might discover that you could start writing articles on your industry. You might realize that there's very little information on how to do what you do in your industry. So that by getting into the industry and mastering it at this level, you might realize that you can start writing articles, and these articles can get posted or videos on YouTube. And they can go viral. People start referring to them, and then all of a sudden, your article might be read or downloaded by umpteen thousand people, and all of a sudden you're a celebrity in the industry, and then word of mouth leads to customers. But just keep in mind, there might be the opportunity to write articles on the industry that people aren't writing articles, or even, do I have it down here? No, or write a book, articles or book. Next is a vehicle to meet power brokers. So as you research and develop your industry analysis, you can use this as a non-threatening vehicle to meet people of power and influence in the industry, such as financial institutions or law firms or consultants, people that ultimately could be key references to get you hired. So let's say you're in an industry that has consultants in the industry, and you're developing some article or book on your industry, and you use the process of writing this book to introduce yourself to the CEO or managing partner of a consulting firm in your industry who knows the people who hire you. And then it gives a chance for personal relationship to be developed. And let's say, you ask for advice on your life or some way to get this person to buy into you, and all of a sudden this person turns around and has a meeting and starts sending very, very lucrative type deals towards you. So this is some of the spin-off balances in the spirit of Malcolm Gladwell's, and I think that's my next slide, in the spirit of Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, that can come from the process of developing your industry analysis. Also, I want to throw out here that sometimes in the process of going through of research and building and acquiring all the knowledge to develop your industry analysis, be open to the reality that you might have to go back and start tweaking the first draft of your mission statement, tweaking your vision of success statement. It might be bigger than you thought or not as big as you thought based on stuff you learn in the industry analysis. Same with the organizational structure. You might realize there's some aspect of the business model to be in this industry that's got to totally change based on something you learned. Then also, as you get into learning and developing and presenting your industry analysis, you might have to totally restructure the phases of development to get into it, because maybe there's laws and regulations and cultural and barriers of entry that you had no idea existed. And as you get into outlining, explaining how the industry works, you discover this and you say, my gosh, I've got to put up many, many more steps to set up this business, to execute it before I go any further. A tug of war that takes place because, as an entrepreneur, you just don't take no for an answer, and you're just very passionate. And sometimes you rush into starting the business without taking enough time to go meet people who are already in it. And you discover from that process, such as if you're starting something in the food service industry, laws, regulations, health inspections, and how crazy they get, and all the conditions and licensing that you have to have in place to do what you do. So there's many benefits that come from this, and no doubt they are going to affect your mission statement, your vision of success statement, your organizational structure, and phases of competitive development in some way as you master this information. Okay, well, that wraps up our talk on how to develop an industry analysis. Hope you got much from it, and we will see you at our next video.